Hi everyone, so thank you for the introduction. I have a company called Posse.com. So Posse is a social network of shops and customers. So we help people through a phone app and a website find places near them that have been recommended by their friends, and we help shop owners connect with their customers and also build promote themselves to new targeted customers. So I'll share a little bit about Posse and how it works and what it does later. What I really want to focus on is the journey of starting a technology company and building the company. Before I launched Posse, my only experience of what it would be like to build a technology company is I'd seen the Social Network movie. So I don't know if you'd seen that movie, but I saw that movie and I thought, well, that looks like a lot of fun. And then when I started the company, I was in for a bit of a rude shock because it didn't quite take off like the Social Network, like it did in the Social Network movie. It's been a lot harder. So I'll share that journey. I also want to share a couple of moments that shaped me growing up. I grew up in Wellington, and that I think are potentially unique to someone who grew up in this environment and that have shaped the kind of entrepreneur that I've become. And then I'll go into a few lessons that I have learnt, I guess, through my career so far. So yeah, I grew up in Wellington. I went to Wellington Girls College, and when I was growing up, I was the age of the kids at the Michael Fowler Centre that I just spoke to, and this guy was Prime Minister. So I don't know if you remember him. Big, charismatic, awesome Prime Minister called David Lange. And I was in this experience shaped me, and I was in my second week of high school at Wellington Girls, and I remember we had to do this project, and the project was, what do we want to be when we grow up? And we had to go and interview somebody from that profession, and we had a little dictaphone and a list of questions, and the idea was you'd go and find a teacher or a nurse or whatever you wanted to be, and you'd ask them, what subjects did you study at school to become an X? And so I thought, well, obviously the best job is the Prime Minister, because that's obviously the top job in the country, right? So why not that? I want to be Prime Minister. And so I remember I walked up to my school office, and I looked up the Prime Minister's office number in the phone book, and I dialed up and I said, hey, my name's Rebekah Campbell, I'm a third form student at Wellington Girls College, and I need to set up an interview with David Lange for my project. And the secretary was very nice, and she said, okay, what you need to do is write a letter, say who you are, what you want to ask, how long you need, and we'll come back to you. So I wrote my letter and I posted it off, and then I called back a week later and I said, did you get my letter? It's Rebekah again. And she said, yep, we've got it, and we've scheduled you in next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. And I was like, oh, great. It's pretty impressive for my first school project. I've got an interview with the Prime Minister. And so I walked back to school and I told my teacher, I said, I've set up an interview with David Lange for my project, and I need to get out of school early next Tuesday. And she didn't believe me. She said she thought that I was lying to get out of school. And so I was really confused. I didn't understand what was so bizarre. It was pretty easy to do. I hadn't done anything remarkable. And it wasn't until the school, the Prime Minister's office actually called the school because there was a scheduling change and they needed to move my appointment, that they were like, oh, she really has set up an interview with David Lange. And so I went and did the interview, and he was amazing. I remember he sat there, he just had his hands behind his head and his feet on the desk, and I asked him my ridiculous list of questions, like what subjects did you study to become a Prime Minister? And I told him I wanted to be Prime Minister. He said I was going to be fantastic. And I got an A for my project. But the lesson in that was that all of my teacher and adults thought that there were these huge barriers to just, you can't just call up the Prime Minister and ask for an interview. And as a 13-year-old, I didn't have those barriers yet. So I kind of learnt at that really young age. It was a very powerful lesson for me, that if you want to do something or you want to contact someone, you just do it. The barriers are just in people's heads. So my next project happened just down the road here, actually, at the Civic Square in Town Hall. I was 20, and it was I think it was the end of my first year of university. And I was looking, we have these great long holidays of 3 months, and I said, what am I going to do with 3 months? And so I thought I would organise a concert to raise awareness of youth suicide, because at that time, Wellington had the highest youth suicide rate in the world. And I thought that was crazy and something we had to talk about. And the idea it would raise awareness of different support organisations. And so, again, I needed to organise a high-profile person to be the headline act, and a friend of mine worked at BFM in Auckland, and she had Neil Finn's home phone number, and she gave it to me, and I called him up and said, hey, my name's Rebekah, I've got this, I want to organise this concert to raise awareness of youth suicide, this is something I'm really passionate about, I'd love you to play. And it just happened that he picked up the phone, and he spoke to me, and he happened to be really passionate about the same thing. And so I sent off, a fax to him, and we spoke the next day, and he agreed to perform at the concert. And after I had Neil Finn on board, then it was still really hard to put the whole thing together and to raise the money and get all the other acts, but it became a huge event. We had about 15,000 people at two stages in the Civic Square and the Town Hall. And the whole thing was broadcast live on national TV. And that was in 1998, I think. And what that taught me as well, I think potentially unique to growing up in New Zealand, is that you can just call someone like Neil Finn, and you can just call someone like David Longy, and they'll pick up your call, and you can make things happen. And so as a 19-year-old, I kind of became to know myself as someone who could come up with an idea and then make something happen. And I think at that point in your life to realise that really shaped what I was going to do next in my career. Because if I knew that I could make what I wanted to do happen, then what else kind of was possible? So after that concert, Neil Finn's manager, who was in Sydney, called me up and asked if I'd like to come and work for him in Sydney as his assistant after I finished university. And so I came over to Sydney a year later. I worked for him for a year, and I discovered in that time that even though he was very nice, I didn't really like working for somebody else. I quite liked to work for myself and do things my own way. So after a year, I started my own music management company, and the first act that I signed to my management company was a group called Evermore, who at that stage were a completely unknown group of 3 brothers from Fielding, and I worked with them over a long time. I managed them for the 8-9 years when they were together. And built them over a long period of time. And then I also built this management company where we developed the careers of all these other artists. I got to my late 20s, and music was really fun for that first period of my life, but I guess I'd stopped learning, and so I wanted to do something different, and technology looked like something that was really interesting. And so I decided to look for an idea in technology. And my initial idea was inspired by someone like this. I was trying to sell a concert tour for Evermore, and for some reason one of the show in Perth just wasn't selling very well. And so I had this idea to help sell the tickets, which was to get the fans to sell the tickets through a website, where if I could if I could get the fans to spread the word about the concert online through Facebook and through MySpace at that time, and give them commissions and give them backstage passes if they could successfully sell the tickets, then that would be really helpful in helping us promote our events. So I just, with my own money and the money of a few friends, I kind of enlisted a local web development company to help me build the site. And this is the very first, quite embarrassing now, version of Posse that we launched about 4 years ago now when we launched this site. So I want to go through the process of starting the company to give you an idea of what it takes and what I've been through and where we are now. So the first 6 months are really, really important time. And the thing that I think I did really well in this time was that I just started. I always hear a lot of people talking about, I'm going to do this, or I've got this idea, I'm going to do that. The most powerful thing that I actually did was I just started. The first thing that I did was to register the domain name, which was posse.com. And I bought it in a crazy online auction in the middle of the night, and I ended up spending $28,000 on it. And that was a lot of money for me at that point. I was trying to buy my first house. My mum is here today, and I remember calling her up because we were pretty close to buying a house and saying that I couldn't afford the house anymore because I just spent a big chunk of my deposit on a domain name. And she was like, "What's a domain name? Can you live in a domain name?" And I said, "No, you can't. Kind of, you can live in a domain name, but it's a bit different." But yeah, I bought the domain name, and then after spending all that money, I thought, right, okay, well, now I actually have to do something with this crazy idea. I went to Ticketmaster and I signed a deal with them before I actually had the domain name. I had the idea for the name, and before I had any kind of product, I just got a friend to mock up some wireframes who was a graphic designer, and I went in and presented to Ticketmaster as if this was something that we'd already built or we were building, it was coming soon, and did they want to do a deal? And so I was able to do a deal with Ticketmaster right from the very beginning. And then I had kind of global ambitions right from the start, so I got friends in New York and London to set up part-time offices. The lessons that I learned in that time is, well, firstly, a great name has really helped us. So it might sound crazy that I spent $28,000 on a domain name before I even started the company, and I guess it is, but as soon as I went out to raise money, as soon as I started speaking to the media, as soon as we started building a brand, it's just been so valuable to have a name that sounds like it's going to be a big company. And it's easy to remember. It was great, as I said before, just to dive in and get started. I found outsourcing to a web development company very difficult. And I had lots of challenges with that. It was obvious that if I was really going to build this business, I needed to build my own team. And then also I struggled to remain focused by having all these offices in New York and London and Sydney, and we hadn't even really started yet. I was kind of all over the place. But I learned a lot during that time, and I just kept going. So this is what we built, kind of second phase of Posse. And this whole process took me around about 2 years until we got to the point where we realized that it didn't work. And it kind of did work and it didn't work, so it was a bit of a challenge. It did work in that we sold $2 million worth of tickets in our first 18 months of being live. We had partnerships with all the major ticketing companies, and we sold tickets for really big events like the Big Day Out and Jack Johnson and all the major festivals. But we learnt that our business model was kind of inherently flawed, and that is that our cut of what we made was very small. And so even though we were doing lots of gross ticket sales, we didn't make that much money, and the cost to acquire every band or every tour was very high. And so, and then our clients had shops, which were the tickets, and the shops would effectively shut after 8 weeks when the tour was finished. So we had this constant churn of clients as well. So it just wasn't scalable. And so eventually we sold that business to Future Music, who was our biggest client. They still run it today, so it wasn't a total failure, but we didn't make money on the business. We lost quite a lot during that process, but what we had gained is we'd gained a whole lot of learning. So I had to decide at that point, did I want to go back to the investors and say, hey, here's this tiny bit of your money back, or did I want to try and keep going and use the learning to build something else? And I decided to keep going because I thought that we could take all of the things that we'd learned about what works in music and how do you build this kind of two-sided network of bands and fans and them communicating with each other and motivating each other to sell tickets, and could we apply that to another industry? And it seemed pretty obvious that we could apply the same thinking to shopping. And so I went out and started speaking to shop owners and potential customers about this type of product and worked out how they could, what they would use it for. The thing that I did differently the second time round is that I spent a lot of time focusing on really understanding the principles of the business model and the principles behind why people would use the product before I actually started building it. So I spent 3 months doing focus groups every single day, 2 or 3 times a day, with shop owners and with consumers. And I'd ask them questions like, instead of saying, okay, why do you like sharing recommendations for places? I would say, tell me about your last trip to New York. Tell me some of the places you discovered and what was great about them. And then I started to get a sense people's eyes would light up and they'll talk for an hour about, I had an amazing trip to New York last year and I discovered this great cocktail bar and this amazing yoga studio. And it was really obvious by starting to have a lot of those conversations that people like to make place recommendations because it is a signal of their lifestyle status. So it wasn't about sharing, it's really about signaling your lifestyle to other people. And so once I had that as a principle, I could use that to design the rest of the products. And there was kind of about probably 6 or 7 key principles on the user side, and then 6 or 7 key principles on the merchant side that we used, and we used those to design the product. We also built scalable business processes from the start, so we didn't get the whole system going and then realize that it didn't scale like we did in music. And also I focused on getting the right people on board, so building the right team and also getting the right investors from the start. So this is the retail product which we've launched, and you can go to now. This is our homepage. Just the process of starting again after music hadn't worked the way that we wanted it to. I went out and raised $4 million. It wasn't all at once, but I've raised $4 million over the past, it's been about 2.5 years. And to raise that money, I've done more than 1,000 pitches. So, I mean, probably 30 people have said yes, so 970 would have said no. So I've pitched an average of probably 2 to 3 times a day over, say, 2.5 to 3 years, which works out to be, 1,000 or so pitches. So yeah, it was a big lesson in that. It was really, really hard. It was also hard to motivate the team because the team were tired after the music side, and then I had to get them all energized again that this one was actually going to work. But what I did differently, that I did well, was I started with a much bigger vision. Music was, you could see how it could grow into a nice little business. There's, bands and fans, and there's a certain number of bands, and you can work out the size of the industry, and you can work out how you can make a bit of money. But it wasn't a huge vision, and it's much easier, I think, to raise money for something which is a much bigger vision. And in shopping, you could see how this could actually become a $1 billion business, which millions of people would use, as opposed to something that was quite niche. I got great industry leader support. So the founder of Google Maps was one of our first investors and joined the board, also the first investor in Twitter, one of the first team members at eBay, and they've all been instrumental in helping me shape the strategy. In terms of raising money, things that I did which really helped. One was I learned how to speak in public. I'd never spoken in public since high school, and I was terrified at the thought of speaking in public. But I went and did a Toastmasters course and another drama course, and it just made a huge difference because I raised a lot of our initial funding from speaking at pitch events, where kind of like competitions where you speak to rooms full of investors, and I found that everyone else had much more established businesses than mine, potentially stronger ideas, bigger teams, but they were all so nervous and focused on kind of managing the fear of being in front of people that they didn't get their message across. And so learning how to speak in public was a key thing that I think I did right. Just didn't give up. I kept making sure that the business was growing while we were fundraising. And I started to build my personal brand. So I started writing a blog during that time, and I was very open in the blog about all of our challenges. And then I also started to build a brand on social media and started speaking at different events as well. So I think just building my own personal brand has really helped us attract the right people in terms of team members, but also investors, board members, and everyone else. So building your own brand is important. So this is our team toasting when we finally launched the first version of Posse, which was last March, when we launched the phone app. This is Posse today. So the way that it works is it's a phone app on Android and iOS. When you join, you make recommendations for your favourite places. You build these little virtual collections, and you can choose themes. And there's little hand-drawn versions of all the different shops. And so when you start using the product, you can make a little collection of your favourite places to go in New York, or your favourite coffee shops in Wellington, or your favourite yoga studios, and you create these little beautiful little collections. And it's very similar to something like Pinterest. It's just that it's places instead of photographs. And the way that it's displayed, you want to show. It's a way of showing off the places that you go to. It's like an extension of your personal brand. In some ways, Facebook is an extension of your personal brand based on who you associate yourself with. This is an extension of your personal brand based on the places that you go, and that's why it works. More than 70% of our users make place recommendations, which is an unheard of statistic in terms of a network of people that contribute content and use content. Usually it's about 80% don't contribute content, whereas 70% of our users actually contribute content. So because everybody's making place recommendations, we can show you places around you that your friends or friends of your friends like, or people that have similar taste to you. And then on the store side, we sign up all the stores when people recommend them, and then they get their own dashboard. They can see everyone that has recommended them. So if you recommend the Matterhorn restaurant, As soon as you make that recommendation, it fires off an email to the owner and with a big picture of your face and something nice that you've said about them, and then they can interact with you and send you some kind of gift to say thanks. And it's a really nice interaction between store owners and their customers. And the store owners love it because they can start to build a community of people that like their shop. This is just how we've built the scalable business process. So you can see the difference between what we're doing now and what we did in music. We didn't succeed because we hadn't built processes that scaled. Our cost to acquire each customer was higher than the amount of money that we made. So now, the way that it works is as soon as you make a place recommendation, if it's not on our site yet, we then have a team of phone callers that will look up all the details for that place, and they'll call them and we'll say, hey, we've got great news for you. Sarah's just recommended you as one of her favourite places in the world. And we'll read them the nice thing that Sarah said about them, and we'll ask if they want to join so Sarah can recommend them to her friends. And 95% say yes, so we have about a 95% conversion rate. We then set the store owner up with their own little dashboard. We make them the little shop front, and they're set up on the site. And so we've used that process now to sign up 45,000 merchants. And the cost to acquire each merchant is $2.50 from start to finish. So, and it doesn't matter where they are. So you can recommend a shop in Italy or New York or Wellington or Sydney, and we'll sign them up in exactly the same way. So our mission is to build the world's largest network of engaged shop owners and engaged shoppers. So this is Posse today. So we've got 45,000 shops, more than 200,000 people have downloaded the app. We've got about 24 people on the team between Sydney and Manila. A great group of investors, and where we're going to go with it next is now we have this network of shop owners and shoppers. There's a whole lot of other things we can do with that. So at the moment people use the app to find places and to recommend them, but we're about to start putting mobile payments through the system. So you'll be able to, when you walk into a cafe, if you've got the Posse app, it'll automatically come up and say, hey Steve, are you after a strong flat white, or whatever it is that you normally order, and you can just go yes, and it will fire off an order, and you walk out. So it's one app. It becomes a ubiquitous kind of shopping platform that is used by shop owners and shoppers. So yeah, our mission is to become the Amazon of offline shopping. So just to finish, a few key things that I've learned along the way. One is that barriers are imaginary, and I think in New Zealand, probably more than anywhere else, that we should be getting this. Like, this is why I think New Zealanders, punch above their weight on the global stage, is because we don't see the same barriers that people see if they grow up in the United States. You can just call the Prime Minister, you can just call Neil Finn. And if you think you can't, then that's just something in your head. Just start is my second lesson. So, I mentioned before, like the goner people who are always gonna start something. Don't be one of those people. You're gonna make mistakes. I've made loads of mistakes and had lots of very low points, but really, you get there in the end. It's just about starting and then putting one foot in front of the other. Seize every opportunity to learn and recognise that you'll often be wrong. So, make mistakes, but keep looking for how you can learn and move on to the next thing. Never give up, obviously. I mean, we should have technically failed so many times, but the only reason that we're still going is that I just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it and kept, brushing myself off and going off and doing another pitch meeting, and eventually you figure out what you need to figure out and you get there. And then the last thing is live your brand. And I've kind of squirmed at the thought of thinking of myself as a brand, but we are now, I guess, all brands. And you build your brand and your reputation through doing things like speaking and social media, or writing blogs or writing columns. But building your reputation and then living that kind of authentically is a great way to get started, and more opportunities will come to you. Thank you.